5:37.
Good evening. Let's call our special board meeting to order, and I'll ask the treasurer to call the roll.
President Baker?
Present.
Mr. Brown?
Sure.
Vice President Cole? Ms. Gibbs?
Here.
Ms. Hudson is absent but listening in by phone. Mr. Peretti? And Ms. Reyes?
Here.
You have a quorum
Thank you,
present.
Mr. Treasurer. And unless there's objection, we'll dispense with the Pledge of Allegiance. So the Vice President and Mr. Peretti indicated they'll be a little bit late this evening. They do plan to join us. Board Member Hudson is on the phone to listen in. So having said that, is there a motion that we adopt the agenda before us?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Okay, and you can see by the agenda, we'll just simply be talking about the search tonight. First part of the meeting, we will adjourn into executive session. So if there's no further discussion, is there, Mr. Treasurer?
President Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs?
Yes.
And Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
That motion carried.
And Ms. Gibbs, would you offer a motion? Oh, yes, you do have it.
Yes, President Baker, I move that we recess into executive session pursuant to section 121.22G1 of the Ohio Revised Code to consider the appointment or hiring of a public employee or official, and pursuant to section 121.22G3 of the Ohio Revised Code to discuss with the attorney for public body pending or imminent court action.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Hearing no discussion, Mr. Treasurer?
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs?
Yes.
Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
And President Baker?
Yes.
That motion carried.
Thank you. The board will now recess into executive session. We'll be going across the hall to room 021. We will return here just as quickly as possible, and we will ask counsel from Taft to join us.
Yes.
Let's reconvene. All right, thank you all for your patience and participation. So we have a table full here. Board Member Hudson is on the phone with us, unable to vote or count as quorum, but she did want to listen in. So let's move on then quickly to our next item, which is the search discussion. So we're going to hear a sort of general status update, and we're going to hear from our search firm. They're here with us tonight. And the first thing I'd like to ask the search firm to do is just to provide sort of a brief recap of the get-to-know-you meeting that we had today. So the search firm and our legal counsel and the ESC representatives and our mediator all met today right before this meeting to have a get-to-know-you sort of meeting, get all on the same page. I was there, and I just simply provided input from the board based on our resolution, sort of defining roles based on our resolution and our previous discussions. And so, Dr. Hill, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
It was an excellent meeting in terms of having an opportunity to discuss who the key players are and what their roles and responsibilities are. So several things we talked about included things like communication and who's in charge of that and which pieces of the search process fall under which category relative to broad-based topics like that. We were allowed as the consultants to ask specific questions and receive some specific answers. And for those questions that we asked, and there were only one or two, that it's kind of a wait and see what happens with the board. That conversation and discussion took place. So I'm very appreciative. Both Dr. Kastner and I have talked about the fact that we've not done a search where we had so much help and support. So this is really wonderful. We think it will make your role, your job easier because it's been doled out and separated out again with this additional support.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Hill. So we have Dr. Reimer and Dr. Tombaugh obviously here from the ESC. As you know, we have our mediator here. We also have representatives from Taft, the legal counsel here. So what we talked about tonight being is just the opportunity for the search firm to take us through the entire process, to get input from the entire board on how we want to move forward, also to sort of set the timeline, And so the floor is yours, Dr. Hill.
Okay, and Dr. Casper will join me as need be in terms of the conversation. One of the first things we talked about in the interview is that the board needs to make sure that they're all on the same page with regards to what the ultimate goal is. And so we're making an assumption that the ultimate goal is to find the best possible leader for Columbus City School District within a abbreviated time frame, utilizing some of the information and materials from your previous search. And I saw Ms. Gibbs kind of go back in terms of the abbreviated time frame, so we're going to kind of talk about that. But I need for the board to clarify if that's not the case, if that is not the goal, because everything else follows from, again, focusing on that, what that goal is. Comments, questions, thoughts? Talk to me a little bit. Give me some feedback in terms of what was happening with that abbreviated piece.
Sure.
Ms. Gibbs?
Yes, thank you very much. Let me welcome the entire team onto the table into Columbus City Schools. It's been a long time coming to get all of you here on board. And so we have anticipated your arrival and your onboarding since we started this process. And my goal is to lean on your expertise and your leadership and guidance on the best time frame to get us the best candidates, and that you will let us know how that happens. There was a draft time frame that was put together under the assumption that once our search firm was here, they would provide one that was realistic and that it was the most beneficial to our ultimate goal of finding the best highly qualified candidate to lead the district. I am of the opinion in my travels and in my training that this is not the most opportune window, and that everyone is getting ready to open schools. And I wouldn't feel comfortable if someone walked out on their district a month before it was time for them to open their school. However, there's a lot of work that we know needs to be done on the front end, and I just yield to your expertise and your guidance, which is why we chose your firm to give us the best direction.
Okay, excellent.
Any other thoughts before Dr. Hill continues? Mr. Brown?
I agree fully, and I want to hear from our search firm, who are the experts in this, what are the pros and cons of whatever decisions we make, what are the consequences, and if we want to try to do an abbreviated search, and I don't think we need to or necessarily should, we need to know what that means, and want to hear recommendations as well on what's the best time frame, that we can work on under, in this situation, under these circumstances.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Brown. And I'll ask everyone, if you can, to just speak up and try to project so that everyone can hear. And Dr. Hill, please continue.
One of the first things I need to do is talk to you about the consultants. As again, Dr. Kastner and I are the primary lead consultants. Dr. Wayne Harris may assist us, but it's going to depend on what your calendar looks like. And so in communication with him, once we got an opportunity to see your original calendar, he may or may not be able to participate in the activities that we have. So we have an alternative, because you always have a plan B, and I would like to be able to share with you the resume of Dr. Paul McKendrick from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, who may serve as an additional consultant, either totally in place of Dr. Harris or in addition to Dr. Harris, given Dr. Harris's schedule. So again, it's that notion of pre-planning, it's that notion of not letting there be any surprises, and then after, if you have any questions about Dr. McKendrick's resume and qualifications, we'll be able to have that as a discussion.
Thank you. Board Member Gibbs.
I hear you keep referencing, but I feel the need to clarify. We don't have a board calendar for the search. So I hope you're operating off of the assumption that once the consultant was on board, that you are absolutely open to provide a new timeline for us and one that you think's well. And so I want to make sure It's not our understanding that you're bound by something when.
Now, let me give you a concrete example.
Okay.
Tonight's meeting.
Is President Baker?
Yes, ma'am.
I have a comment. I was trying to comment earlier.
Go right ahead.
Because it's an intro, thank you. I just wanted to clarify at least my view, and I think that it's a little bit in between what I'm hearing other comments from colleagues. I certainly think that, what we put out there before with the EST's help was a guideline, and it said we need to do this quickly, and certainly we want to get the best candidate possible. But I also think that the time frame that, again, looking at the time frame, it isn't open-ended. And I think that time remains of the essence for a number of reasons. But I think, one, because of our prior search, the second is to bring stability to the district. And third is so we have permanent leadership. So I am anxious here, and I do think it's important to hear Dr. Hill's recommendations, and so I'm not suggesting otherwise. But I wanted to say that I think it isn't. I would prefer to see it open-ended, and I would pleased to see the alternative that was put forward in the draft email and the email to us, and so I just wanted to put that in there as we go forward now.
Thank you, Ms. Hudson. Mr. Brown, did you have a quick
Yeah,
comment?
just very briefly, one of the things that, at least in my view, worked against us in the earlier search was that some candidates didn't want to wait for the long time frame between when they applied and when we were going to get back to them with an answer. And I don't want to lose people, so we need to move along expeditiously. That doesn't mean rushing and abbreviating the search.
Right.
We want to do it right, but we also don't want to lose people in the process.
So let's once again, you have Dr. McKendrick's credentials, but let's play out, and I'm going to ask my colleague to step in. What happens typically during, call it superintendent season? The best time for beginning a search is essentially what you did the last time. Typically, it starts in the fall. It tends to be a 22-week process, but within the context of that process, you have your community engagement activities, you have your individual board meeting activities, you have, so that expands that particular piece. You've done all of that. You've done those pieces. And so that automatically enables you to compress your calendar. So that's one part. The second part is that typically in the superintendent world, the best time for people to apply is late fall through March. Because in April, that's typically when there's a discussion about contracts. So if you're talking about the opportune time, that would be it. However, having said that, there are other ways that you can expedite a search and still keep some of those parameters in terms of who you will attract to apply. And so I think that was the principle that we were looking at when we looked at the search calendar that was provided by the ESC and what we felt would be a realistic calendar in which you would get some quality candidates. So let me play this out a little bit more. For a district your size, first of all, Dr. Kastner talked a little bit about the pool in and of itself. Even during prime time, the pool is not going to be that big because of the percentages of large urban school districts there are in the United States. And when you're looking for a candidate that's coming in with those criteria, you automatically shrink that pool just by virtue of the numbers. So that's one piece. However, there is another segment that would be available and amiable to this particular kind of process, and that might be a retired superintendent from another state who would have some flexibility, who would have some experiences, and for them, this time frame would fit and would work. In addition to that, you will have a pool of candidates who are at the deputy level, kind of the next tier down, who may not have had the superintendent title, but have had the superintendent experiences because they've worked on facilities, they've worked on financial planning, they've worked on community engagement, they were the representative for the district in legal, legislative aspects, so who come in with some kind of experience. So when you look at pulling out the urban superintendents that are seated, which was going to be a small pool to begin with, and really kind of target your retirement group and your people who are in, you know, that next deputy level, then the possibilities, the prospects of your getting a candidate in to apply for this position becomes greater. Okay, so just giving you a little bit of background in terms of the rationale of what happens through the superintendent process in terms of who might apply. The other thing that we noted, and Kevin and I talked about a little bit, was in your previous advertising, there was one specific line that said something to the effect that, you know, minority candidates, you know, we're seeking minority candidates, or we're looking for minority candidates, or Kevin, you remember specifically the word? Because I took it out. Because what it did was it sent a message that limited, again, who would apply. And just those little nuances impacts your pool.
I think more pertinent is someone that's had experience in a comparable urban system that has the skill sets to be able to communicate well with all segments of an urban community is something that can be value added, but it doesn't have to necessarily, you know, you're looking for gender, you're looking for diversity, and that's what you want to try to find with the pool.
So when we look at those particular aspects of who would be interested, who would be available, if you look at it through a different lens, then that enabled us to look at the calendar that was submitted and think from a rational perspective. While you could do all the activities that are listed there, realistically, there are some pieces that we would recommend that you add that time frame wouldn't allow you to do. And so what we attempted to do was to provide you with an alternative calendar that takes into consideration these other pools that we're now really going to focus in on, and not having looked at what your previous applicants looked like, but doing that targeted recruitment for those groups out there that would be able to complete the application and start mid-year. Now, again, what we're suggesting is that you're looking at a possible start date in January, because that's a natural break in terms of the school year, in terms of the school term, in terms of the fact that you will have people who may have served as interims in places and will be turning over and would be able to start in January. So those were some of the rational things that we looked at when we talked about that particular piece. By expanding and waiting until July of 2019, we're not sure that your pool is going to expand.
Make a comment. You're looking for a superintendent successful in their district, and a school board that's trusted that superintendent to help them begin a school year. They aren't the type of people that wouldn't want to be there to get everything underway. Again, we have two other pools besides just sitting superintendents, and we've talked about them, and if all of a sudden the flexibility gets a little bit more favorable, that's fine. 60 days is not an unusual time to ask for a transition if the system's going to move. It's a negotiation between your school board and another school board. But that is a reasonable amount of time, because if people know someone's going to make a decision, and since you are a preferred district and it was going to be considered a destination in all probability, they don't necessarily want to hold someone back that's been loyal to them. So there's no exact science on this, but I think it might work against you if all of a sudden something happens where you want something done that's going to affect the beginning of the school year. The whole idea is when you set a date, if all of a sudden someone is available sooner, then you say, or soon as available. And then you have the flexibility, as it turns out, how you feel about the one you want. And then that's part of the negotiation. We think that in order to hit all three of the different segments that could be a possible pool, this would do justice to the urban superintendents that are the type of people that you know from your the great city school council groups, things like that. So that was our thought.
That was our thinking and our rationale in really looking at the pool in of itself and what tends to play out in terms of who, when they apply. And I've done searches where we've done it in the beautiful time frame that's been laid out with, starting in the fall and then doing all that and ending in the spring with the announcement. And their pool has not necessarily turned out to be all that wonderful. I mean, it was good in terms of the time frame, but for that particular time of the year, for that particular kind of district, for those people who were applying for that particular position, so by waiting to do July 1st, again, we can't guarantee that you're going to have a better pool than you would if you had a January start. Now, the start, or at least looking at this other calendar, was talking about September. And I'm like, sure, you can get somebody to come in September if you want a custodian or a bus driver or something, someone that may not meet the criteria that you want. But we certainly believe that there's a pool of candidates out there that would be available to start with the start of the school year. So that's point number one. Point number two, and I think you were right on point in terms of the notion that you don't want somebody who's going to just drop and quit their job to come work someplace else, because if they did it to them, they'll do it to you. They'll do it to you. And so again, that notion of the integrity and looking at what your applicants look like and why they're leaving and where they are, again, that notion of being in a secondary position where you can get school up and running and started and then leave and it's okay, or you've retired from another district and so therefore you're working on a consultant basis or you're back at the university. Some of those other pieces play into inclusion in a pool for a January start date. So having said that, if you pick that as a start date, and I've used a backwards design model, then you need to determine when would you like to announce this to the community, and building in some transition time. And then from there, then what does that look like in terms of your meetings, in terms of the application deadline, in terms of when you're doing your interviews. All of those pieces work back from what your start date you would like to move from.
Board Member Reyes?
So, so the likelihood of getting somebody that starts the year, a sitting superintendent, is probably going to be slimmer because of the January start date, which is something that we had as an issue before. It's kind of like you're telling the CEO or superintendent, and that's coming in to start the year off in August, and they're applying, taking that scenario, applying, let's say, the deadline's the middle of September, right in September. So I'm the sitting superintendent of a good superintendent, because we want a good superintendent. We don't want a candidate, we want the candidate. They start the year off, and then they have to go to their community and their board and say, I'm applying for a job in a month.
There's probably going to be a silent period where they're considering an application and we're also vetting them, but the decision making is going to be something that's going to maybe occur a few months later. It's not like they're going to be starting the school year and their name's going to. Now, we understand the sunshine law, we're going to follow those. But there are a number of people, when they apply, they'll begin talking with us, and they might even submit an incomplete partial application that's not official, because until they press that button, then it becomes official. And sometimes people will debate on this. They'll do things like watch your school board meetings. They'll do things like doing a little bit of homework on your district. And also they're going to talk to people that know people. So it doesn't happen where all of a sudden they start the school year and all of a sudden they're putting themselves out there at that point. Now, that's not the same necessarily if someone was a deputy or somebody like that, but we're going to have to follow exactly whatever your legal counsel tells us in order to make sure that we explain to them the way that the rules will apply for here in Ohio.
Yeah, because once they become an applicant, they're
understand.
public records. So
Right, but let me give you another scenario. I've been with the school district for 5 years. And now it's time for me to move on. It's time for me to go on to a bigger district, a higher district. And I know that this is the last year of my contract coming up. And so I will start to look in the fall.
Right.
And again, recognizing that this is going to be the termination of where I am, then I can notify my board in the fall that I'm going to be moving on because it's going to be a part of their contract. So that's the counter to what you just asked in terms of people making decisions
That's the
early.
ideal
Right.
scenario.
Right.
But sometimes the best candidates are the sitting candidates, right?
Sometimes, but
Sometimes.
not
Not
always,
always.
which is why you utilize the profile to the max. You really look at who has demonstrated and who can demonstrate the skill sets and the characteristics that you have identified in your profile based on community input, based on your input, based on your feedback. And sometimes it's not a seated superintendent. Any other?
Any other questions so far, Ms. Gibbs?
Oh, yeah, sure. So, in the same vein of avoiding the past hiccups, is there any magic to setting a firm start date or telling the candidates we want to hire you in January, but you can start later, so there's time to transition with the other person? Because the same way I don't want you to leave a week before it's time to start school, if you're non-traditional, then it's great, right? We don't have a problem. But would you leave in the middle of coming here and we start budgets hot and heavy in January.
Right.
And you have no idea
Right.
what we're doing. And
Right.
so from other people, but tell me your ideas and your strategies around that.
I think that that's valid, and I think that you could say, you again, and I think Kevin alluded to it, you could say as soon as possible, at least by.
No later than.
Right. And so that gives you that window of flexibility in terms of negotiating with the person that you want. Because again, part of it is them having to make the determination that they're going to let go of wherever they are, whatever they're doing, in order to come here.
Sean, I was a January start.
I was an October
And
start.
it turned out to be a very important thing for the momentum of the system because there's a lot to learn, but you didn't have to wait a whole year. And the board's going to have certain directions, and the budget is a instructional document and getting that involved. So it can work either way, but I'm just saying, I saw some of the advantages of me getting up and running sooner through the direction of the board, as you're new coming in. You're not there to make major decisions right away, but you are at the point where you're understanding the direction of the system.
And I was an October start. I think, again, the board decided kind of at the last minute that the superintendent announced at the last minute that he was retiring. And so the board got a late start, but I did not start until October 1st.
And to Board Member Hudson's point, I don't want it to be forever, but I do realize some of them may not be coming alone. So, the partner needs to find a house. They might need to find schools. In January, we're gonna bring you in on our CODIS. I mean, we want you to learn to love the snow, right? But, I mean, in all, to be fair to the candidates,
Right.
I definitely have in my mind, no later than, but if you wanna say I wanna identify them as soon as possible, but I don't wanna say, and if you're not here by February 1, then you don't get to start. I just hope we have flexibility on the start date, but I'm as excited as soon as you say you want to come, and if you can come sooner, definitely come. But realize that we're not moving a person, we might be moving an entire family that needs to find housings and schools and another job. And I don't know if we have people on board to help with that, because corporate companies do, but
Right.
for us, maybe not so much.
And sometimes candidates act,
I'd like to
Yes,
raise my
ma'am.
hand, I think to some of that point, for an executive level position like this, I think that could be worked out, and to your earlier point, I think the budget process is really the marker. And so the sooner somebody's at least connected with the district in the fall, by the fall, if they're connected with us, they could then be able to learn, at least, that's a great due diligence process, and I think we've got a lot of great data and a good structure for somebody to connect and at least begin to be part of that process starting in January, when all that really cranks up. So, but I think the, family move and all that, if somebody's going to relocate, they will, and then our folks, if we need to do something to help with that, I think we do what we can, and but the budget piece, I think, is really like a top goal, that we have somebody engaged by the fall so that they can really, in a robust manner, engage in that budget process.
the other piece in terms of the move, again, typically that's what that individual discusses with their spouse, their family. It's not unusual for a new administrator or a new superintendent to go to the job and then not have the family move until, because particularly if you got kids in school, you don't want to pluck them out of school. They're, you made your friends, you got to have time to buy a house, and you don't want to do that in 15 days or less. So some of those things, but again, it's the support that then the district gives them in order to accommodate the plan that they have for making the move. That becomes a critical aspect in terms of your negotiation and discussion. So yeah, they have to have that discussion with their spouse, but I know if you have a high school senior, you are not gonna pack up and move your kid. I don't care how good the job is, because you can still have to live with that teenager. And so, the realities of it are people work that out, but again, it's really important for then the system wants you with us to support whatever plan they put together. So, I'd like to kind of maybe have one more minute of this discussion, because we have lots and lots and lots we have to do, and see where we are by the time we get to the end of this.
Okay. Any other questions or comments to this point for Dr. Hill? And Dr. Hill, are you looking for direction from the board on choosing that date?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm looking for direction on the board for choosing the January. Hold me.
I didn't say a word.
The January or up to, a specified date that you identify beyond that. But that decision will be made at that point. Does that make sense?
I think.
Does that accommodate
the
what
language
you're saying?
that I would recommend is January 1st or sooner. And the point is, if you negotiate somebody and they're so good and you want to extend that, that's fine. But you got to draw a line in the sense of you got to have an application process closed sometime in September, and then that would be there. But that gives a message for people. And the other thing is it causes someone to try to make a decision if they want to be here. Now, this is your call. You ask us for our opinion, and I get that. And we just need your direction, because as we were talking about backward mapping, until we get that date, then we can't backward map, that's all.
Mr. Brown?
I like January 1st or sooner.
So is that a recommendation from BWP?
That's all right.
That's your
That's our
recommendation?
Well,
Ms. Hudson?
how would this change what BWP circulated to us previously?
It does.
That was the
That's what-
ESC that
Yeah, that was our recommendation.
Dr. Hill indicated that was their recommendation with what they shared.
Oh, okay, fine. I like that.
Okay. Any other feedback, board members?
I agree with the recommendation.
And as Dr. Kasser said, the caveat is you get somebody and January 1st is not doable, then you can negotiate.
Be flexible.
then you can negotiate
Looking
that,
for
that
January
particular.
first.
Board Member Gibbs and then Reyes.
So tell me one more time, what is the best time frame, and how does that relate to what you're recommending now?
The best time frame is to start the process that we've started now. But you've already done some of those intermediary pieces, and so you don't need that amount of time. Targeting specific groups that may or may not have been targeted the last time you did this position is the direction that we're moving in order to garner you a pool that would have the flexibility to start in January or start at the first of the year. And that's the difference. When you do it in the winter, it's open. And you may or may not target the retirees or university people who left public education and went to the university and, had the experience that you're looking for. So it's just kind of open for everybody, whereas this would allow us to really target those who could conceivably come in the time frame that you've identified with the skill sets and experience and matching this profile.
And tell me the process of if we're not pleased or satisfied with what the first search yields.
Okay. The process is then we're back here. We're replanning. We're saying what's Plan B, and if Plan B is okay, we didn't get what we thought we were going to get. One is to look at your characteristics and profiles. What seemed to be missing in the candidates that we had. So again, you get to go back and take a look at that. What's your new date? What's your new deadline? How long are we going to, re-advertise? All of those things, because the goal is to get you a good superintendent.
I haven't been in that situation before, but one of the things that I have seen done would be you would leave it open till filled. And you leave it open-ended, so as soon as you attract a pool that you think, and the board members see that pool and they feel those candidates are worthy of their interview, then you can maximize your flexibility. But instead of starting over and starting out another date,
Right.
it's just, we aren't gonna sacrifice the quality. We're just getting that, we're looking for that one person, So if they come along a little bit later, we hope that isn't gonna happen. That's not what we're trying. We'd like to see if we can hit it within the deadline we just recommended to you.
Board Member Reyes.
That was along the line, because I heard the pull the trigger comment in our last search. If somebody really wants to we're forcing them to make the decision. But again, because of the sunshine law and the whole being public and having to have those conversations, it's a difficult conversation for a sitting superintendent or even a deputy superintendent. Maybe it was one hoping that the sitting superintendent was gonna retire in a year and they were hoping to get that spot to go back and have to tell their district, it's September, school just started and I'm looking for another job. And that question was posed previously, whether we would have an open-ended date. Because again, we're trying to find the best candidate, not pick from the best that you have. I mean, if you're lucky enough to have the best candidate in your first pool, that's wonderful. But I don't want to pick the best that I have. I want to pick the best that's available. And if that means that they apply in October and we can still hit the January date, I'm happy with that. But having a deadline with your previous point, and all three search firms mentioned the timeline and the difficulty of hitting that because it's not prime recruiting season for superintendents. So I want to make sure that doesn't come back and bite us again, like it did this previous search, by setting such a harsh deadline that we maybe didn't get I'm not even gonna talk about the last time, maybe don't get what we want to get. So that flexibility to me makes me feel a lot more comfortable.
Okay.
I'm okay with the, say in January, working backwards, but that was my question, pushing the app deadline if need be. And I know pushing the app deadline may only garner one or two more candidates, but those one or two more candidates may be the ones we're looking for.
Ramona, I don't know if we emphasized this the other day, but we're not going to put any candidates before you unless we feel they met it. And that's why when we make the assurance that we're going to guarantee this for 24 months and we'll do it at cost, we're definitely not going to sacrifice someone that we don't think is going to take care and do the right things for your system. So we're never going to sacrifice anybody just to have someone in a pool unless we feel they're the type of pool that we're going to stand behind. And that means sometimes having less before you. But we also, in the transparency we have, any of the candidates we consider, the board will be aware of who those candidates are. And if they have an interest, then that doesn't exclude them. It just means that we do not think they're reached the point where we're ready to stand behind them.
All right, so then it's your suggestion or your recommendation then is we go with January 1st or sooner, and we're leaving there's no application deadline, it's open. Is that your recommendation?
We probably, no. Now, once you determine the January 1st date, then we probably would put out an application deadline.
Yeah.
And in all probability, and I haven't talked, Deb and I haven't talked yet because we didn't want to get ahead of you. It would probably be sometime in September. And it wouldn't be the beginning of
Put the
September.
comma,
It would
or until
probably
filled.
either be in this window here.
Or until
Or
then.
until filled.
Okay.
You just add the little,
Perfect.
you still set
Yeah.
a deadline, because otherwise you'd be here
Right.
forever.
Any objection?
I'm not.
Oh, and
Yes,
can I
ma'am.
for clarification?
Yes.
So because I can't hear everything the last speaker was saying. So you're suggesting, or consensus would be around the schedule circulated by Dr. Hill, which would then include when the application is posted, it would have a deadline for submission, so that we're interviewing in August and September, and then we're looking to get a candidate that potentially identified in October that might start as late as January. Am I paraphrasing that correctly?
Dr. Hill?
Potentially, but again, we're talking about a higher date and going back to the difference between the ESC calendar and our calendar is about a month. It's about moving that
Yes.
forward a month. And what again happens is it does a couple of things. One, in looking at the calendar, one of the things that we talked about during the interview was this notion of day in the district. In the calendar, the previous calendar, you won't have time to do that because school will just barely be started based on that calendar.
I'm not suggesting, thank you for that, I'm not, I think we've moved on past the EFT. So what I paraphrased would have kind of an end date that we're looking to identify superintendent in the early part of the fall, and then to get a contract in place so that they may start as late, there's a possibility they might start as late as January, but that we have identified that this isn't open-ended. I think it's quite important that we don't have this be open-ended, and that we don't get into the delaying that we were in the first search.
Okay, so, Dr. Hill?
I was just gonna say, if you look at the calendar that we submitted, we were talking about an application deadline of August 11th.
What calendar do you have?
Oh, you guys didn't get this calendar.
And I
Should
would,
have it.
I would
Do you have
agree,
additional
I agree with that recommendation, and I like that, and I understand why. It provides more time for everyone, and that's recommended by BWP, and I understand it's not ideal, but it's also, a better time frame under the circumstances, which makes sense to me, so that I'm okay with all that.
Dr. Reimer, can I see, or Dr. Tomo, can we see one of your printed calendars, please? Thank you. We don't get great reception in the basement.
So let me kind
Go over,
of,
maybe
let me
just
kind
do
of
that.
play that back. The intent for the August deadline, the original deadline that was submitted was sometime in July. And what I looked at was at least 8 weeks. Remember, this is summer, people are on vacation, they're doing all kinds of other things, they're not necessarily, so we extended that, first of all, a couple of weeks. So that's 2 months. In a regular search process, we usually give between 8 weeks and 10 weeks. So in terms of just the application time frame, it's really, you know, pretty comparable during what would be the full search. So that was one of the changes, one of the differences, again, if you work backwards. Because in the other one, there wasn't any built-in transition time. And we think that that's an important aspect of the process, is that whoever's coming in, whenever they're coming in, there needs to be some time built in terms of transition. So we tried to incorporate that particular piece. However, having said that, if by August 11th, we have not garnered the applications that we thought we were going to garner, then prior to that, we'll be able to come back to the board and say, you know, we were hoping we would have 8 good ones. We may have 1. We want to extend this another 2 weeks because we have some people that we want to tap and pull into. So it's allowing you some flexibility within the time frame still with your January date. Okay? It's allowing a lot more flexibility with your January date, but when you have, because what you do then in your posting is you say the deadline has been extended.
So based on the January date that I think we've got consensus on, when should the application deadline be?
That was why I identified it as August 11th.
Okay?
And that's from tonight or tomorrow when we can post it on the BWP website. August 11th, I want to say it's almost 4 weeks. It's like 3 3/4 of a week.
Colleagues?
I mean, 8 weeks, not 4.
Okay. Do we have consensus? Okay, all right, so I think we move forward. Okay, let's move on.
Okay, so moving backwards, then if the application deadline is that's the second Saturday in August, and again, we recommended a Saturday because people get stuff done on the weekend that they may not have gotten done during the week. The intent would be that BWP would do our turnaround time the following week. So we would do the review of applications. The process that we use is we do it individually, we review the applications, and then we do it collectively. So whether it's Dr. Harris or Dr. McKendrick and Kevin and I, we look at all the applicants. We've been looking at them all along, but we identify those that we think we should pursue individually. And then we collectively meet to identify those that we want to follow up. So you've got kind of a 2-tiered process. Again, each of us taking the profile, and we have to rationalize and justify why we think that this candidate is a good candidate or not. So when we're done, we have a pool of 10 to 12 applicants that we will then follow up with to do our own interviews. So that we would be doing interviews at the end of that week, and we typically try to have a kind of over a weekend type of process. We may do interviews via Skype or FaceTime or Zoom or one of the other media applications. We may determine that we want to do them in person because, again, it's going to depend on what the pool looks like. If you have a pool of a lot of people from Ohio and they can get here, I'm big on face-to-face. If you have a pool where you got 2 or 3 from Ohio, but you have a lot from surrounding areas, we may choose to do it from an electronic perspective. But all 3 of your consultants sit in on those interviews. We don't do a one-on-one. We collectively interview those. And from that then would come who we would recommend. But again, if we get to that point and we determine once we've talked to those people, because sometimes what you have on paper is not what you necessarily get in person. So that interview from my perspective allows us to validate whether we want to recommend and move this candidate forward.
Any questions on that?
Okay, here's something else that we would need your help on. And I think Bill's the one that will help us with this. We gave you an example of an announcement. This announcement, until we have a date, doesn't mean anything, but now that we have a date, the way it would normally work is, even in your communications department, or even whatever your past announcement, we would not put this announcement out until the board would approve it. So we'll work through Bill. If you have any tweaking, then you need to tell us that. And at that point, then we would use information here that's already been supported, and then we would get the things into Ed Week or any type of the journals we would do. But this is not a final copy. This was just a target here to look at. So we would need this turned around within a week or sooner.
Sooner.
And again, we can put in the dates, but you have a communication person in the audience here, and we did not have the expertise necessarily of knowing what you put out, and the types of things you want to highlight for your system. We didn't have the opportunity to look at your last announcement, but we would hope that you might be able to improve upon this and whatever it is that you'd want for an announcement like this.
Ms. Gibbs?
So is that all of the marketing material that we're gonna produce? No.
No, we were looking for a starting point. We were looking for, here's some of the pieces that you want to include for a couple of reasons. One, we need to be able to post it on our website immediately. There's going to be a vacancy announcement because remember, now we've identified a deadline, and you want to get the word out there as soon as possible in order to give credence to that deadline. So that's number one. The publication ads may look different because, again, we needed to see what was already done. They're shorter, you have to have shorter space, those kinds of things. One of the reasons that we're pushing on this is because Kevin will be attending the Urban Superintendent Conference. Where is it?
Louisville.
In Louisville, right after the 4th of July. And this would be a prime opportunity to take a document that has the information and be able to spread it around and begin to start to talk to people about the position. And so getting the advertisements down and finalized and approved becomes a critical mass
So
in
why don't
terms
we
of the
circulate
process.
that through the ESC to the board, get any comments by the end of the week and get it back to them, and get that finalized this week. Seems pretty easy.
Ms. Gibbs?
So when would the marketing material be ready? Would it be ready in time for your conference?
Oh, yeah. This should be ready as soon as you all sign
No,
off.
not that.
Well,
Like-
Shauna, there's another way of looking at this. I'm not as big on marketing materials because what we want to do is reach out and talk to people and say, now here's the application. So I don't want to ever just leave it for granted that a paper copy is going to necessarily draw people. What we're going to try to do is draw representative groups of people. If it's the Broad Foundation that gets into the teaching of future superintendents, or the Harvard group, or the Great City School groups, that's fine. But if we just put out the Ohio State School Board Association and all that, so a lot of this gets down to more up close and personal, and getting into it that way, because you're just not going to be able to attract people just by putting out the brochures. But we will do but this basically is what you have, and then the rest of it, and then people look at our site on BWP and they know who we are, and the same thing with the Ed Week. So a lot of this gets done because of our network, more so than just marketing materials.
I understand that, but as I was looking at the searches, and I followed Omaha and Philadelphia and Jacksonville and New York, all of them came with a comprehensive marketing, because I don't take it for granted that people know Columbus, Ohio, and that we are great, and I know we are great, but if you're not in the Midwest region, or you're wondering why should I move from a very nice place with no snow in California or in Texas, what does Columbus, Ohio have to offer? And I saw a plethora of different districts that use marketing material and have website links, and really made it really easy to find out about who we are and how advantageous we are. And one of my biggest pushbacks on a rush timeline is that we don't take time to develop all the tools we need to market our district to people who are familiar. And I know the superintendent circle is real small, right? So they're probably already talking and they're gonna wait. And when they see it, they'll do that. But I wanna make sure we have the time to put our best foot forward and we have all the marketings and the tools and the resources, because we're not the only district looking. And we have to compete with other districts, especially on the East Coast, for higher salaries, especially for people who have, in Florida with no state sales tax, especially for people who want to move closer. I mean, really, so we're in boards and training with other boards that are looking for superintendents. And for the last year, we share notes too on how did they market to get where they wanted to go and how did they put up there. So I understand that starts the piece, but I don't want to truncate any part of the process that's going to enable us to market this district well.
But I think that we start with the basic pieces, and then we put that back into your communications realm, because you already have some things that you started from the last search. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel.
You know, Sean,
Well, but, okay, so you take that as your baseline and you improve upon it.
one of the things that we could use your help on, and particularly when you know some of those good ones, when we're posting, when people have access to your website and you have the superintendent search, you can go far more than just what you have here. And that type of outreach, we certainly would welcome any types of examples that you think stand out, and then working with you. See, we're gonna work through Bill, and Bill's gonna then work with your communication people. The board's gonna know what you wanna put on your dashboard. So all this kinda is us working as a team. And anything we can do to make this value added, we would welcome anything you could help us with. Because you know your district better than we do. You're the experts here, so help us.
Mr. Brown?
Yeah, a lot of these kinds of materials that I think that you're talking about are already created and out there. Experience Columbus, the Board of Realtors, have a lot of that kind of information about the community because they're often used, and the partnership for that matter, used to attract CEOs, attract executive level people. And I don't think we need to reinvent any of those things, but we do need to be able to either link them.
Right,
or-
that's it.
Customize.
That's it. That's the linkage and the customization, and then you include that, for more information, click this link, and it goes in and it gives you information about housing. Click this link and it goes in and gives you information about community foundation, or click this link. So it's putting together that particular piece. But that's kind of in addition to, separate and apart from getting the vacancy pieces relative to the actual position. And so that's kind of where we were thinking and headed, and trying to get that part started and done immediately, because we're now talking about having a deadline which may need to be extended, but you don't want to shorten your deadline because you were fooling around with trying to figure out how to do the paperwork.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. So has that posting draft been shared with all board members yet?
Yes.
Yes, okay. And so I think if we can all just review it again and provide any input, why don't we provide that to Dr. Reimer as our liaison with the search firm? So let's set a deadline of when? I don't think we need till the end of the week.
Thursday.
Thursday.
Let's close the business on Thursday.
Wonderful.
Everybody will provide their feedback to Dr. Reimer on the posting, and then Dr. Reimer will share that immediately with BWP.
If you include the communication part as well, if we're getting input on that.
Okay. All right, so moving from that, the advertisement piece, we're looking at, again, August, where we would do the slate presentation with a special board meeting at the end of August, not knowing what your calendar looks like. So it may be something that happens, that occurs during that week, but we need at least a week after the interviews in order to do the follow-up.
So you're thinking closer towards the week of 20th of August then?
Right. Towards the end of August,
For a
and trying to
special
get it done before the
Because
holiday.
we have one on the 17th and the 21st
Right.
already.
Right.
Okay.
And
Chime
again,
in when you see something like that. 'Cause I don't have that
It's
way.
like, that's why I'm like,
So please
so
just say
again,
something. Makes it much easier.
giving us that week in order to do our research, because we go and make our phone calls and do our reference checks and all of that. We need that, and then in the letter of understanding, we talk about at least 10 days. I mean, no more than 10 days when we come back to you with the slate. And so that keeps us within that time frame. So that's another date to consider.
Before you
Yes,
go,
ma'am.
so I see 3 bullet points under BWP in your events here. Research background information, prepare training materials,
Mhm.
and conduct board training. Could you tell me what all that means?
Okay, so when we come back to present the slate, it's, in addition to presenting the slate of candidates, we will, if we have candidates that we believe are appropriate, we will give you all of the information, the background, the detail. This is what we found out when we did our reference checks. We do not rank order the candidates because you as a team will have to decide of the categories which one it really matched from your perspective. We
So
try
you
to
do
look.
background checks from the,
We don't do
Not yet.
the thorough background check. We do the preliminary background check.
the
We,
Google thing? And
we,
the-
yes, and we check
Gotcha.
their references. And we go beyond just looking at who they listed in terms of their references.
Gotcha.
We start to call people who know people who know people.
I remember
Do they really do X, Y, and Z? So that's what we're talking
That
about.
answers my question. Okay.
So with the board training, once we presented the slate, a part of that then begins to train you for the next process. And again, you have some of that information already. We will give you a draft set of questions that you may want to take a look at so that you can identify the process that you're going to use. It's great that you have a mediator who can then help facilitate that and who participates in that training to know what's you've been given and what's been expected. What questions can you not ask as a part of the whole interview process? So all of that information is all done in that same evening. Putting the wheels in motion for your second round of interviews, which is going to be different from your first round of interviews, which is going to have a set of different interview questions because now you're going to go in depth, talking about what that looks like. One of the things, for example, that we recommend is for that second round interview that your candidates give a presentation on a process or a project. You get to determine what you want that on, but you build that into that interview piece. And then the day in the district, how is that going to be structured? How is that going to be facilitated? How are you going to get the input? All of that stuff gets decided and discussed, much like we're doing this planning session. That's what that training is about.
You see, when you're getting into that second round of interviews, the board still won't reach a consensus of who they might want to bring back for a day in the district, which is almost an extension of that, because then you're opening up the process in the transparency that we've discussed. And so at that point, that's the type of planning that you'll want to do.
Okay. All right. Did that help? So once that training takes place, then if the September date after the holiday starts again, and I just gave you a window of a week because not knowing what people's schedules are. But you're going to want to look at your first round interviews, and our recommendation is you do them consecutively, or you do them, again, depending on, well, but you got those 2 weeks. It's not just that September 5th date.
Oh, no, I'm talking about vacation.
The important things in life. But that's then a recommendation. So if you do it, on the 5th, then you have a week, and then you would start with your semifinalists again sometime during that week. You would do your day in the district, and then you would have your board selection opportunity. So in essence, it's using the month of September for your decision making, as opposed to July and August, which is what the previous calendar did. So that's the primary difference. It also then, in October, gives you a window for contract negotiations. We hope that, because you have such a crackerjack law firm working on this, that contract negotiations will go smoothly. One of the pieces that we do to assist districts is when you get down to who your finalists are, we ask them ahead of time, what would be some of your contract expectations? And then we pass that along to the district, to your attorney, so you'll know baseline where people are coming from. Okay? So that's another additional piece that we include to help with the contract negotiations piece. The expectation is then by your October meeting, you can announce, and I plugged it in on your regular board meeting. You may want to do a special meeting for it. But again, just trying to modulate your time, that you would then announce who your finalist is, who has accepted, the contract. So now you're all the way through October, and you have October and November and the first part of December to do transition. And again, it's gonna depend, it goes back to your point, Shauna, about then people talking about when their people gonna move, and you get a chance to have that kind of dialogue, more in-depth, maybe site visits. The person gets an opportunity to meet with the administrative staff. I mean, some of that preliminary stuff can take place. You try to work it around your busiest times of the year. So, for example, if you'll notice when I did Day in the District, I plugged it after Labor Day. Your school doesn't begin until August 23rd. The last thing principals and teachers want is somebody stomping around in the building when they're just trying to get school up and running. And so, again, taking that into consideration was one of the things that caused us to look at those September dates for that process.
Ms. Gibbs?
How does this work with the sitting superintendent that may want to interview?
We treat the sitting superintendent just as we treat every other applicant and candidate. They don't get any special perks just because they're the seated superintendent.
Okay.
Questions? Any other questions?
Do you want to start
President
trying
Baker?
to set some of these dates?
Yes, that would be, because then that will, once the dates are set, you're gonna be surprised at how fast the rest of this goes.
We're not really surprised.
So let me share with you, Dr. Hill, some dates that we all already have on our calendar, just to
Okay.
see if any of these jive up with what we need. So we have July 12th, Thursday, July 12th, Tuesday, July 17th, Tuesday, July 31st, Tuesday, August 21st, and Thursday, August 23rd. Those are dates board members already have set aside.
Thursday, August 23rd, the day school begins?
21st.
21st.
Oh, the
Versus
21st,
a
yeah.
school board meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, 21st of August is a regular school
Okay.
board meeting.
So do we need the July dates if?
That's my next question. So,
If you'll notice, that what I plugged in, if you look at your the July calendar, I plugged in contact with us with just, again, profile information, where we are. That can be done via telecommunications. We can Skype in, call in, we can be a part of your regular board meeting. Again, that gives you an update, gives us a chance to see you face to face, or, at least communicate from that perspective. The same thing is true for your regular meeting on July 17th. We can make an online conversation with you. Here's where we are. This is a status report of what it looks like, because again, remember, if we're talking about that application deadline and having to do something different with it, by then we'll have a feel for what it's looking like coming in. Nope, we need to scrap this whole group and start over again. We can begin to have those conversations if we get an opportunity to communicate with you in between without us having to be here. So that was the intent. Because you're not meeting on the 31st, I just included, what I looked at was an every other week, kind of contact, whether it's vis-a-vis telecommunications or by phone or written document. And again, the intent is that for the purposes of transparency, you can share that with your community. Here's where we are in the process. Here's what it looks like. Here's, where we are. We've got touch base with 15 people or whatever that is. So I tried to take into account those board dates, and then just plug in others, again, leaving that sort of a window of during that week when those things might occur based on people's individual schedules.
Yeah, we normally don't meet in July.
We don't meet in July.
yeah, the board is in
Just
recess
that
in
much.
July
We usually
typically.
recess in July. That's the only reason why you're hearing.
Right, so we have three
Little bit
dates set in July to meet to discuss the search, when we're typically in recess that whole month.
Do you think it's good for us to touch base though in July?
I think, well, I personally think, let us do our work and let us come back to you right at the end of July. because
Yes.
I'm just telling you.
Okay, and the only reason I plugged that in was because those were board date, I've looked at the first and third calendars, and that was the reason I included those. But we can give you written updates relative to that don't have to be us being here or us communicating with you, other than, and when, again, I'm really big on concise. So, one pager, bullet points, this is where we are, this is what we're doing, here's where we are in the timeline, this is what it looks like for the month of July.
So what you're saying, Dr. Hill, is that we may be able to release July 12th and 17th
Yes,
from our calendars.
yes.
Any objection?
Nope.
Let's not all speak at once.
Release them, yeah.
Yeah, I
Mr.
don't,
Vice President?
I still, and I do understand where people are. My thought is just, we should have some sort of tentative date. I think if there's opportunity to actually confer with you guys before the 31st or by the 31st of July, because we got an August 11th deadline, application deadline date, it makes sense to me to at least confer with you guys at least one time in July for an update, whether it is technology-based or whether it is
So what
face-to-face.
dates did we have in July originally? It was
12th,
17.
17th, and 31st. So
Keep the 31st.
can we do that update?
For what, I think Vice President Cole's idea is a good one, just so we have a touch base point.
They offered the 31st as the touch base. Yeah, that's 2 weeks
That's
before the
22.
application deadline. So they said release 2 of them and keep 1. I think that's in perfect agreement. You said you need time to work.
I'm fine with the 31st.
Yeah, so now, if we're gonna do the 31st, everybody needs to be here. Because if we're gonna meet, we all need to be here to meet. But if everybody can't meet, we need to release the date. Because it's summer and everyone has things to do. It is the only time I get to spend with my family. And I'm sure everyone else has wonderful things they want to do as well. But when we come together, just look at the cadre of people that we need to bring to the table.
So how about we just look at our calendars right now and make that, and double check?
And then we will do it
Double check.
electronically.
And then, so you won't be here on the 31st?
We will do it electronically.
And they'll be doing it, so that's gonna be on video?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so they're coming together. So you can just put that on our website and we watch it from where we are?
Wherever if you're here, we can be here with
A
you.
regular board meeting,
Right.
them Skype
It
in.
needs to be a board.
That's,
Right.
let's just
And
do
have
the
these
31st
Skype,
board
yeah.
meeting.
Okay.
And we
Let's check our
physically need to
calendars
be in the
and
same room.
In case you need to make any.
cover this.
Votes, then it has to be
Mr. Brown, can we accommodate that?
Yes, we can. Technically, you don't have to be in the same room. You could all be at your home.
I'd
You
rather.
No,
can't make
board meeting.
decisions if you're not in
We
the
can-
same
correct.
room. Just an
Okay,
FYI.
so we'll all be here.
Because if
and
you
we'll
want to
be
extend the
able-
deadline,
Mhm.
you can't do
Thank you,
it via
Madam.
Skype.
But the deadline is until the 11th.
And then-
But they're gonna know, they're
We're
gonna
gonna
have
know
a good
that,
indication.
right, whether you're
of
gonna
what's
need to
coming.
Formal
extend the
decision
deadline.
has to be made in the board form.
Okay, so colleagues, unless there's any objection, we're removing July 12th and 17th from our calendars. We're keeping July 31st, and BWP will plan to update us on the 31st. If there's any significant update prior to that, you can do that in writing. Dr. Hill? is that-
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Brown?
With respect to the 12th and 17th, I think it may make some sense to think about and check with our current administration about what else is in the works that may be, that we may need to meet for before we release those dates. You know, there's several things, we're going to get a presentation tomorrow. And I don't know if we're gonna get everything acted on by the end of June, right? That needs attention. I just hate to release dates prematurely.
Okay.
Those days were for
Specifically for
superintendent search
this.
specifically.
It's very specific.
Yes.
So I would respectfully disagree.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so that's that. So update July 31st. That's the next time we'll meet with you and the whole team to focus on search. So then you talked about a date at the end of August to talk to us about applicants and...
Yes.
Okay. And do we need to meet prior, between July 31st and the end of August? Do we need to meet in between those two dates? We do have August 21st on our calendars already.
Okay. I like the 21st.
I'm not available on the 28th. Just FYI.
Okay.
on this
First
calendar.
guys.
Is everyone still available on August 21st?
It's a regular
Yes,
school board
That's a
meeting.
regular school
Yeah.
board meeting.
Yep,
Yes.
I
So-
find my vacations around that.
Yeah, I'm available.
Thank you.
The
I'm
concern,
on the 20th.
Yes, Dr. Hill, is
okay,
that
the
enough time?
well, the concern is that we will not have had an opportunity to do our reviews.
So you don't think that gives you quite enough
No,
time?
that doesn't give us enough time to make our recommendation phone calls. So the question becomes, any other day? No, you're gone?
I'm going.
Okay.
We run into some vacations and some other travel.
Just that last week. I'm back the following week.
Okay, how long, Dr. Hill, how long do you think you will need after the deadline for applications to get everything done before you come back to us?
We need at least a week.
Okay. All right. So,
I need to get my
let's
calendar
look
'cause I need to see.
at some dates. When are you back, Board Member Reyes?
I'm back September 1st.
Okay,
As I said, I'm back the following week.
okay, back on
Well,
September,
and the deadline is the 12th,
11.
August 11th.
the 11th. So if you need a week, what about the end of, like, the 23rd? We are holding the 23rd after the Office of Accountability Committee meeting.
August 23rd, no, that's the first day of school.
Put it at nighttime.
I think we had held that.
Sorry, out, just the first day of school.
We
We had
did,
set it aside.
we did hold August 23rd, but you're,
That's the first day of school. Come on, y'all, we need to be places. The entire board needs to be
It says
representing
in the
the
evening,
district.
I mean, after school, we're talking about 5 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
We
5:30.
represent, get up, usually go to
Except-
the school board depot and do all that stuff. I mean, in the evening is what we.
I won't be here on the
discussed.
23rd.
Well, ding, ding, ding.
okay, all right. So,
And I won't be here on the 23rd, so.
okay, so then we are September 1st or beyond. Okay, okay, so let's start at the 1st.
That's Labor Day.
Dr. Hill, when are you available subsequent to September 1st for a meeting?
Wait, did we take the, wait.
Yes.
Did we take the 23rd off the table?
Yes.
Dr. Hill's unavailable that day.
That day, yes.
Oh,
That,
okay.
that, as a matter of fact,
All right.
that week.
She's out that week,
And Dr.
okay.
Hill's important to be there.
She is, she is.
So why don't we look at the 5th or the 6th then, or the 7th? One of those days.
Dr. Hill's looking her calendar. so-
Oh, but once we get out of August,
So was the tail end of August
yours were fine.
is out?
Board Member Reyes is out that week,
October.
yeah.
Okay.
So,
September.
so we're September, what is September
Well, we're
2nd?
Sunday.
The second is
Labor
Sunday,
Day.
the third
That's
is
Labor Day.
Labor
Labor Day
Day.
is the
Okay,
third.
so
Right.
let's
And we
keep
have a
going.
board
First
meeting on
is
the
a
4th.
Saturday.
Scheduled on the 4th.
Okay,
So, well, okay, so if you,
6.
if you want to incorporate it as a part of your regular board, it depends how much business you think you're gonna have on the 4th, because we're still gonna need 2 hours.
yeah, we don't know
2
that
hours?
yet, so I would say probably not do it the
Yeah.
same night as a board meeting.
Okay.
What about the 5th or
Not if you want our
6th?
full attention.
Wednesday the 5th, does that work for you, Dr. Hill?
Oh, yeah.
That works for you?
Okay.
Okay.
Good for that.
September 5th is a Wednesday, does that work for people,
Yeah.
colleagues, specifically?
Yeah,
Okay, ESC,
I mean,
okay,
One of us can make that.
okay, Professor Froelich?
Yes.
Okay, TAF team,
Yes.
could you be represented? Okay, September 5th, do we want to say 5:30?
We say.
Does that work?
5:30.
Okay, September 5th, 5:30, so BWP will be presenting the results of applicants and their due diligence, at least preliminary due diligence related to those applicants.
Correct.
Okay, and then what's our next marker?
Your next marker is your first round interviews and
Okay.
your selection of finalists, of which you're gonna need 3 days. Or, if you have 3 candidates, you could do them all in one evening, but
That would be-
it's really a push.
Yeah.
Tough.
So typically, we say do 1 a night. Oh, no, I'm sorry, for your first round interviews, yeah, you need to do 2. If you have 5 or 6,
Right.
you need to do 2. You can do 2 a night
Okay,
without getting confused as to who's on first.
right.
What about those Tuesdays that we have that are outside of the 4th and the 18th, like the 11th and the 25th?
Yeah.
I'm available that same all week.
You're on?
I am. No, I'm
You are.
available.
Okay,
10, 11, 12, 13.
Tuesday the 11th.
13, those are all good nights.
Okay, so Tuesday 11th of September, The 12th is Wednesday, 13th is Thursday. Do we have availability those nights?
I do.
This is first round
10,
interview.
11, 12?
11, 12, 13.
11 was in
Yep.
Okay, and what ultimately happens is when we do the presentation with the candidates, when we tell the candidates that they're one of the people that we may be recommending for the slate, we will advise them that during that time frame that the board would be, if approved, the board would be conducting first round interviews. So again, they have that time to prepare rather than are presenting their names and then the next week they have to be here for an interview.
Right.
So when we do our interviews, once we've prepared the slate, because we ask people, do you want to be on the slate? We would advise them of the time frame for those interviews.
Colleagues, we're looking at 11th, 12th, and 13th of September. Does that work for everyone?
Yes.
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 MJ?
Okay.
Can you repeat that?
11th, 12th, and 13th of September,
Yes, that works for me.
Excellent.
Yes.
5:30.
Let's lock it in. 11, 12, 13, 5:30. Here, first round interviews.
And President Baker, just to ask if maybe you could ask Tina to set these dates around to us.
Yes, absolutely.
Calendar invites.
Should it be Tina or Bill?
Well, whoever.
We'll work it out.
Yes, this bill to be.
It should be.
It should be the ESC.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
Well, they're gonna
redo
be
I'll
as
redo this
board
calendar.
meetings with notice, so
Okay.
I'll redo this calendar and send it to Bill.
our staff can.
Yeah, and we'll get calendar invites out, so it's on your calendar.
Right.
Okay, so,
Be consistent.
and then when do you want to do second interviews? When do you think that's appropriate, Dr. Hill?
I'm thinking the week of the 24th.
Hold on. On the 13th is when we'll be done.
For the first round.
Yes,
So when do we vote? Because we gotta vote.
Yes,
Right?
that's true. You have to have your,
Are we voting it on the 18th, at the 18th meeting? Because that has to be a public vote.
part of it depends on how many we actually have for first round. So if we only have 5, maybe the third night we discuss and vote, because it's a meeting.
And if not, then we'll decide to keep it moving and keep it open.
exactly.
Our decision, okay.
Okay. So now we're on the second round interviews.
And if we're not ready to make the decision on the 13th,
Right,
I guess the next opportunity would be on the 18th.
we'd have a board meeting coming up, that's right, on the
Yeah.
18th.
So then the follow-up, the second round interviews and day in the district, sometime the week of September 24th, because again, that gives you a week of prep time. No? That's okay. That gives you, my point is that you then have the candidates have a week. You've got a week to prepare for them to be in the district for 3 days. So just a little bit about the day in the district. There are 3 individual days so that when it's structured, the candidates do the same thing but do it in different places. So if you have 3 schools, if they're visiting a high school, a middle school, and elementary school, one candidate will do one set, another candidate will do a different set, and the third candidate will do a different set. So with that part, that includes your second round interviews, that includes your community input component, which is why it's considered a full day in the district. Board members then need to be available to facilitate and act as host or hostesses. And what you do is you can split that in half. You can do, somebody does PM, somebody does AM, and even in the social aspect of taking them out to a meal, you do a small, you do 2 board members and the candidate, and you shift that around in terms of who your finalists are. But when you get ready to interview, all the board members need to be there.
What date, Ms. Gibbs?
September 24th to 26th, we're out for the study visit for Nashville.
Oh, that's
Cannabis.
Nashville, okay. All right, so and
So you could move it to the first week in October. That's why I said you got some latitude and some flexibility in this calendar.
I'm sorry.
I don't think we should move, I think we need to get in, stay in September?
The challenge,
Yeah.
Did
the
you say the
challenge,
24th and the 26th?
24th through this 26th.
Yes, she
The
said
week.
3 days.
It's 3 days.
So we'd be back on Thursday, the 27th.
Yeah,
So- So could we do it, are we back the 26th that night?
We're back to 26th that night.
Okay, so what about Thursday, the 27th?
Remember, you need 3 days.
You need 3 days.
So you could do the 27th, 28th, and the 1st, but let me tell you what happens when you break it up like
It
that.
needs to be 3 in a row.
It needs to be consecutive, because then you get people negotiating and navigating and having all kinds of conversations over that weekend.
Yes, we're going.
Has it been approved?
Has it been approved?
Yes, because y'all not paying for it.
Well,
Yes.
I mean, I'm
I mean,
just
yeah,
asking.
school board,
That's
yeah,
the
they're not-
problem sometimes with some of these things is when we're trying to do stuff, I get you. You know, it's important to do development, but the most important thing is this.
Well,
You know how-
here's what's
This is the way that
important.
we
Ms. Gibbs
adjust
has the
everybody.
floor.
Thank you.
I
So
didn't-
here's what's important.
I know
We're
there's conversations
calendaring
about it.
so that everyone can be here.
It's just the first I heard
So,
about it.
so you'll hear more about it tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
but we've been talking about it for a year. And it's been a year coming, so we're not gonna use this time with all of these amazing people to discuss that. But what I can tell you is that that time isn't available, and it'll be a number of people, going
To on the side.
I wonder if we
to
could,
Nashville. But that first week in October is wide open.
could we, the other alternative is to back it up, but that gets us too close, I think,
we're
to
too
the,
close.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the
October.
first week of October.
Yeah, first week in October.
Well, I am gone starting the middle of October until like from the middle of that week, the 3rd, till the beginning of the next week. But I just.
What about the 9th, 10th, and the
Supposed
11th?
to be a board thing.
But you're gone too, so let's keep it all above board and say, we need a time where we all can be here to make this work. So is there another time, Dr. Hill?
I'm just gonna remind you, I'm gonna go back to, I think, Ms. Hudson's concern about too long a time in between when you're doing X, Y, and Z. You wanna give candidates an opportunity to get it together, those who'll be coming back, and do the notification and do all of the background checks and preliminary. But you don't want to get into 2 or 3 weeks worth of that. Because again, they're anxious, and who knows what other opportunities might come into play. So you may want to, again, back everything up further down the road so that they're not those distances.
What about the 17th, 18th, 19th?
Of what?
September.
That means that you will not have had any contact with those candidates for almost a month.
No, are you saying 17th?
Of
September?
September, that's
It's
what she said.
September 18, 19, 20.
First round, September 17th, 18th, 19th.
Does
And that way
give
we
enough
can
time?
do, and then we,
You're telling these people, take 2 weeks off.
Well, not only that, if you're not gonna vote till the 13th, you could
We may not-
possibly do it if you do it towards the end of the week.
Which would be 19th, 20th, and 21st.
Right.
That's
Okay.
fine.
You could possibly, I mean, again, it's
Oh,
giving
Yeah.
21st, I'm out.
it's giving candidates.
I can do 18, 19, 20. I cannot do the 21st.
I can't do 22nd.
And the 18th is a regular board meeting.
Okay.
So what if we moved our regular board meeting to Monday and did 18, 19, 20?
I don't object to that.
Does that give you time to turn around what you need to turn around?
It's real because at that point, the ball is in your court because you're doing the interviews. It's that you will have just voted on who your semifinalists are.
Then Monday, regular board meeting.
But we're asking them to leave out of their.
so we're getting the presentation of
They're
folks on the
coming from
5th.
Virginia.
And then we're looking at having our board meeting on September 17th, and then doing first round 18th through the 20th.
No,
No?
first round is 11th, 12th,
Through
and
the
13th.
13th. Second round is 18th through the 20th.
And that's why, that's a crunched,
That's correct.
that's crunched.
I think it's the first week in October. They're trying to make it force it, but
But she's out.
Well,
I cannot do
She's
the
out.
first, I mean, that, I just think that drags it. We talked to them the 11th through the 13th, and then we wait 3 weeks. It's way too long.
That's the
Then interview them 18, 19, 20, move
Circle that
our board
on
meeting to the
the next
20th.
week, and let's do this.
Can we do that?
11th, 12th, 13th, 18th,
Flip
19th,
it.
20th.
Do
I
our
don't see why not.
number 8,
Right.
our 18th board meeting to the 25th or 11th, flip them down to 18, 19, 20. And then when, that's only 2 weeks. So if you do 18, 19, 20.
the 18th of September?
Yes.
That's a regular
Yes,
school board
so
meeting.
switch our
That's Yom
18 so we can
Kippur.
still get our own,
I don't believe we've got a, and I don't have a school board meeting on
that's a
my,
regular.
It's a regular
Calendar.
school board meeting.
First and third
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Yeah.
It's
the
all,
18th of September?
Yes,
Yes.
Eric, it's the third Tuesday.
Are you saying you're unavailable that day?
Yeah.
Okay,
The 18th.
okay, that's a holy day. All right,
1920.
1920 is fine. 21st is fine.
but Dr. Hill, you're saying,
21st, I have a family wedding out of town. I cannot do the 21st.
okay,
I can do the 20th, before the 20th, but not the
How about the
21st.
17th, 19th, and the 20th?
But I-
And we move our regular board meeting to the 25th to accommodate Eric since he's not gonna be here on the 18th.
well, now, we may not be voting on the finalists until that meeting on the 18th.
We would be doing it at the end of
No,
the
you
third day of that week.
the suggestion is to
So-
move the 18th meeting either to the
25th.
25th.
The regular
You all
board
won't
business.
be here the
How you
25th.
guys want to do
Which means we'll have to vote on finalists on the third day of our first,
Right.
so we have to push that back, because we were gonna vote on the 18th on finalists, we'll have to push that back to the 13th.
Correct.
If we're gonna push our board meeting back to the 25th of September, which is, all that, I think, is doable.
Doable.
Mhm.
I'm confused. Say what you just said again.
So,
Because I
Oh.
thought we had said we would move that 11, 12, 13
Uh-huh.
down to the next week.
No.
Which would be
No.
17, 19, 20.
11th, 12th, 13th is fixed.
Yeah.
That's solid.
that's first,
That's first round.
first round.
They didn't
Yeah.
want, they didn't want 3 weeks between the 11th, 12th, and 13th and
That's why we're
October.
looking
That's
at.
why they're looking at the next
This
week.
week
17th,
for second interview.
19th and 20th
Right.
For the second round?
for the
Yes.
second round.
Oh, I thought you were moving it.
No.
That's
So-
crazy, guys. You're gonna ask somebody that, let's say for speed's sake, we might get somebody from Virginia. You're gonna have them come in 11, 12, and 13, then you're gonna have them turn around and come back 18, 19, 20.
Well,
They only come one of those days.
Right.
Yeah, but they're sitting superintendents, they're working. They got a job.
if they're from
Well,
Virginia,
One at a time,
Yes.
Dr. Hill?
if they're from Virginia, you may end up not doing a face-to-face first round. If they're from out of state. Again, that's gonna be something that you're
Right.
back to using the technology and doing, you will do a face-to-face, but it doesn't have to be an in-person face-to-face. Okay, so that's a possibility.
And as a prior recruiter, I
Yes,
think
ma'am.
that's a disadvantage to a candidate.
Some-
Just saying, there's some, we always try to be fair to a candidate. If you're gonna interview everybody in person, you should interview everybody in person.
Okay.
That's just my opinion,
Yeah.
you guys can disagree.
I think they'll be here.
It's valid.
People are different when they can Skype and have notes in front of them. I mean, it's just a different,
Notes are great.
I like to be fair to all
Ramona,
candidates.
I want to agree with you that I believe face-to-face, but I also think
You have to adjust, but I'm just.
that you also are a
For your-
destination school districts.
Right.
And if someone wants to compete, they'll find a way. You give them a flexibility of a couple days now to work around their board meetings and things, if that's the case. But
Yeah,
it-
but for the
face-
first round interview, you could successfully do, we've done successful
I mean,
Skype
no,
round.
I just-
And the candidate also weighs into that, because they may have 3 days and they've got, where they can't get away for the time for the 3 days, but they're interested in the position. So you negotiate that particular piece. The final, your second round day in the district, they have to be here. So that was why I was saying that when you identify those candidates, you give them upfront the possibilities of the next set of dates, so they can begin to calendar those in as well.
So what we're talking about then is second round would be 17th of September, 19th and 20th, so those aren't
Yes.
consecutive.
But pretty close.
Okay, because the 18th is a holiday, so
Right.
we won't get Eric. Okay, so 17th, 19th, and 20th for second round, that's day in the district.
Right.
And by the way, the
Yes, sir.
holiday is the evening of the 18th.
So are you available on the 19th?
Shouldn't be, but yeah, that's, that's okay. We can do that. If we've got any Jewish candidates, we also will need to respect those days.
That's a good point.
They'll have 3 days to pick from.
Yeah.
They could do the 20th.
All right, so, and then colleagues, do we want to keep our regular scheduled board meeting on the 18th, even though we know Mr. Brown won't be able to join us?
Yeah, because we're not making this
Yeah.
decision on the 18th.
Correct.
So we'll keep it on
Well,
the 18th.
I think, I would suggest if we don't need to do it, that we should move it, either move it or cancel, because it isn't just Mr. Brown, there's other folks too.
Yes.
Just out of respect.
What are you talking about, out of the regular school board meeting?
Yes,
Community,
the 18th.
the staff.
No, we can't do that. It's the beginning of the year. I understand that, but since it is the beginning of the year, there's a lot of onboarding and legislation
Well,
and
but it's a
business.
religious holiday, then we
Yeah.
can move it to the 25th.
Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
a,
Move it to, yeah.
yeah, but I understand that, but then we would have to move our regularly scheduled board meeting for everything, and that would just become way too dicey. And the district still has to conduct business. We can make it quicker, because it starts at sundown, right?
It's a religious holiday.
Yeah, I get
It
it.
isn't just Eric.
If you want to
Colleagues,
move it to during the day on the 18th, fine.
That's outside the superintendent's search.
colleagues, let's put this aside for now. This is not germane to the agenda tonight.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. So
I have
we-
a question.
Yes, ma'am, Dr. Hill.
The question is relative to if you're having your day in the district, the 17th, 19th, and 20th,
Yeah.
when are you gonna do your vote?
The vote to narrow it from the first round to day in
To
the
pick your
district.
to pick your
Well,
finalists?
we'll have to do it then the evening of the 13th.
No, we've already
Second
talked about
round
that.
is-
We're talking second round now.
Okay,
We're talking
all right.
about your number one.
Mhm.
This is the person we're going after, because that's what this series of, when you get to the day in the district, that's who you're seeking, So when are you gonna have the vote and discussion for
And
that?
would you suggest we do that the evening of the third day on the 20th, or would you suggest we do have that discussion and vote on a different day?
We got a board meeting on the second.
Again, you probably don't want to keep them hanging out there from the day of the district.
Exactly.
3 weeks. Why don't we just do it the 25th?
We're out.
When you said you get back to 27th?
Yeah, we get back to evening of the 26th.
Can this Nashville stuff be
So-
scheduled?
Nashville.
Yes, it's scheduled.
So-
No, can it be rescheduled?
No, this is
This
their
is-
only
yeah,
day
this-
for
they're-
the fall.
And
I have a question.
Their
Yes,
only.
Dr. Hill
So
has a
the
question.
question becomes,
the travel dates.
You can't reschedule holidays.
what, was it the 24th through the 27th? It
It's
was
the
that,
24th through the 26th.
Okay.
So
Through
you're back on the
26th.
We do the
18th,
27th.
so I think that's too long of a period to
That's too
wait
long.
once you've done that, so you're either gonna have to do it on the 20th or plan, I know y'all don't wanna do Fridays and weekends, but to plan to have it on the 21st for your
She's
vote.
not here.
On the 21st,
She's got a wedding.
The 20, let's do it on that Thursday. I have to go to a family wedding on Friday.
so
Right.
that 20th. Just plan a long day.
So at the end of 20th, which is a day in the district, at the end of that day, then we'll convene
Mhm.
to contemplate and consider and vote.
That's fine with me.
Okay, pack a lunch.
And your pajamas.
Well, let's hope. Dr. Hill. Okay,
Okay, so once you've gotten all of that, then you've done the vote. So then the next week would be the beginning of your contract discussions and negotiations.
And this is
Okay.
assuming we're all gonna vote.
Yeah,
And that's assuming we get a talent pool.
right.
right, yes.
This is all,
everything goes
all
well.
contingent upon getting the right people on
Yeah.
the
That
bus.
you have
Or a hurricane
consensus.
hitting
Correct.
us, or
But
Right.
we're planning to succeed.
catastrophic event.
Sure.
But we're gonna think positively.
Right, we're planning to succeed.
And so October is contract negotiations, assuming everything goes according to plan.
So if you have 2 weeks for contract negotiations, minimally, then that puts you at being able to you could continue to make that announcement. You could either have a special board meeting during the week of the 8th of October or do it at your regular board meeting on the 16th. Because that person will already know, and then you'll already be in contract negotiations, so the timing doesn't make it as difficult in terms of, because that decision will already be made. So
We have
those are
a-
your options.
We have a regular meeting on the 16th.
Correct.
So 16th is great.
That could be the date,
October.
October 16th.
That's just to agree, that's just to announce that we've come to
That's-
the conclusion of the
Okay.
contract after we've already
All right.
picked the person. That's just time to get the paperwork done.
And maybe it's,
Okay.
we'll talk more about that, maybe
Okay?
press conference, whatever.
Mhm.
Right, however you decide that you want to do that. So you're going to leave that on the 16th of October?
Let's just
Yes.
pencil it in for now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tentative.
Any objection, colleagues?
No.
Okay,
The
Then,
thing I'm gonna need,
yes, sir.
and I think probably
President,
everybody.
my apologies, I need to sign off. I'm a little late for something.
Okay,
So I'll catch up with you if you have other business to go.
okay.
Thank you.
I'll brief you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right, good night.
Thank you.
The chairperson has disconnected. The conference will now end.
Thank you. Mr. Brown?
I was just gonna say, I like a written recap of all of these dates that we're
Oh, yeah.
talking about. Not just the search dates, but board meeting dates. You know, we've been talking about quite a few different
Yeah.
dates, and
So we'll put our heads together and we'll look for that to come. Dr. Reimer and Tom Ball will coordinate all of that and they'll make sure we have all of that. And somebody will get calendar invites out for all these dates.
All right, we'll make sure Tina gets here.
and then that, the final date is November, and again, I just plugged in some possibilities so that the new superintendent knows this is when you can begin to have conversations about transitioning and how they want to do it, how you want to do it, the role of the interim superintendent in that process. Again, that requires board discussion, but knowing that that would take place, and then we always recommend that then you have some sort of community open house, very close to when you've made the announcement for the new person. So I just kind of plugged that in, but again, those dates are negotiable, but know that from my perspective, that should all be done before Thanksgiving, so that by the time you get to Thanksgiving, it's settled, it's a done deal. You know when they're gonna start, you know it's all done, it's all decided. Or we're gearing up to modify and modulate those dates based on what's happening with the candidate pool.
Okay. And Ms. Gibbs?
Once you said that or, here it comes.
Ms. Gibbs?
So do we need to put
Some
some,
backup dates.
do we need add some dates on the back of this calendar just in case the candidate pool doesn't work? Do we need to just add a couple of dates in October and
You just know how long it takes
Right.
us to agree on dates.
I think you will know better then the closer we get to it.
Right.
So I would suggest you
September.
you may want to do that, but you may do that at an upcoming board meeting rather than trying to do it now, because you're gonna need to see how far along the process you are or will be before you start toggling and making those adjustments.
All
And
right.
think positively. As I indicated,
Yes, ma'am.
this is the hardest part.
oh, don't we know it?
This is the hardest part.
Yes.
Okay, one last thing. We did have a date set aside. We planned for August 21st after the regular meeting. Have we decided we don't need that for the search discussion? Or are we keeping August 21st on?
I thought we needed that.
I think we keep it,
Okay, we'll keep it.
I thought you said we'd keep it.
Okay,
we
All right.
agree.
Because that's after the application deadline.
Right.
if we end up not meeting it,
Right.
then
Well, that's a
So
really
will
good.
it be.
we'll have a birthday party for me.
perfect.
Really?
Yeah.
Mine's
Okay.
on-
right.
Mine's on the 8th. So I'm
Okay.
for you.
All right.
Okay, Dr. Hill, what else do we need
Okay,
to
so-
contemplate?
I just want to review a couple of things. We'll talk a little bit about the transparency, that whole notion of communication, both with the press and with all of your constituent groups. And again, working with Bill and George on the kinds of things that the community should be aware of. This calendar, the fact that as a part of that, we want to emphasize the process and the role and indicate in this calendar where the community feedback and input comes in, what their part is in the process. Took a communications workshop about 100 years ago, and one of the things they said was that it takes 7 times before something sinks in. So every opportunity you get to remind the public of this is the process, this is what we're doing, here are tentative dates. Because again, we don't want this to be in concrete and then all of a sudden we have to change those dates. So this is a tentative, these are tentative calendar dates, expecting that we will be able to get good candidates and a good pool of candidates, again, subject to that particular piece, but they will be notified if the dates change. And so that communication piece and letting everybody know every step of the way, are giving you information about here's where we are. We got, we only have 10 applications. We're going to push a little bit more because we want to have at least 15 by this date. That's the kind of communication that we can give to you. And all of it should be transparent, that's shared with the community. Rather than having a reporter call us behind the scenes and want to know. It all needs to be out there on the table. So we're not dealing with an elephant. See, we got through all of this whole list. Couple of things. We did get the data, so we're going to review that data. The last major piece, hurdle for tonight, from my perspective, is your giving us direction in terms of our opportunity to interface with your constituent groups. You've already had focus groups, you've already had surveys, so what we're going to recommend and what we're considering is establishing kind of an open-ended community, piece where we send out some announcements. If you have some questions or comments or want to engage with the consultants, then you can dial in on this particular day. So some paperwork that goes out, which I talked about earlier, and then an opportunity for them to directly interact with us. And we don't have to be here to be able to do that. So again, it's kind of setting up with your technology crew, whether we do a webinar or some such, but to allow your constituent groups to give us feedback and input, because now they've seen your final report. They know that you have a new search firm. Some people will want to engage with us, and we want to be able to be available, but that's going to have to take place like within the next couple of weeks.
Couple of things. You have a leadership profile that you've taken a lot of time to take care of. You've blessed it and all that. We would assume using that same leadership profile, and we hope we're correct in assuming that if something has changed and that isn't the profile, because when we're talking about advertising, or we're talking about this information on your dashboard or whatever, then that should be there under the superintendent search. The board says that this is the same profile we're going to be using.
Yes.
So I'm saying that in essence. The other two things I wanted to make comment, and these are more random. It's in your best interest not to contact individual candidates. Even if you know someone's going to be great, you contact us and we'll take care of that, and keep yourself separate.
I agree.
Good.
Now, the thing is, your intentions are pure, but you can't it's going to get read wrong, and you want to protect yourself and have that distance. We'll be happy to take any information, and we'll do that, but we'll never mention your name. So I think that's important. Second thing, when we talk about a national competitive salary, if a candidate asks, well, what do you mean by that? We will simply say, the previous superintendent's base salary was this, and the annuity was this, and we go no further than that. Now, they
That's
can get
public
all this information, it's public, and they get it from your superintendent association, but we won't but that's negotiations. So we'll never misstep that, but it will be a reality check for some people. So I'm just telling you that this is what we will say.
So,
Mr. Preddy?
if I may, since we have a leadership profile and you have some data to use, and you'd like to continue to do some sort of dialogue with key interested parties, why not utilize ESC, so we're not utilizing necessarily this space right here, utilize Mr. Bill Reimer and work with him on a series of, engagements with different groups of people and individuals or whatever you think, and kind of build that into the next few weeks,
Right.
like you said that you needed. I think
Because you have already you've already had focus groups, you had leaders, what again, what we would propose is that we extend them an invitation
The opportunity
to
engage.
communicate with, so these are people that have already done this, but you now have been extended an invitation to have a conversation with these consultants. And this is the time frame, and these are the mechanisms in which you can do that.
And I think it's really
Yes,
important
sir.
that it be with the new search firm.
Yes.
That's who people are gonna, I think, wanna talk to be honest with you.
Ms. Gibbs?
So when you say you're asking for engagement, do you need a list from us? And you want the list that the district uses, a list that the board member give you?
I want to use the list that you use to develop the materials that you have for whoever you use for your focus groups.
We
You know.
did that, I was gonna say we did that.
Yeah.
It's already
It's all
available.
there
we
in
have
the
it.
data.
Right, and we talked about that at our previous meeting, that information is already available, but you want to reach out to those people again, because those will be the contacts that you will also have when you get ready to have your second round interviews. There's a community forum piece as a part of the day in the district. I provided you with a sample of what a day in the district might look like, and one of those pieces is the community forum. And so you'll have some kind of mini focus groups, and then you'll have an opportunity for folks to just generally come in to see one of your candidates, not all three or all two, one of your candidates. But you're using the leadership that you've already used in the past,
Right.
Well,
and you may want to add some to
well,
it.
I was gonna say to that point, I think that works. We just had a few leadership changes. That's why I was asking for clarification, because we have a new CEA president, a couple of the other associations just turned over. And so I just want to make, that's why I wanted to clarify what, when we reach out organizationally, that we're reaching out to.
Why don't we provide, the list that we used to Mr. Reimer, have that circulated, that if anyone needs to add anything additionally, we do that, get it over to you, and then you on your end can and hopefully, with the help of the ESC, schedule those appropriate opportunity slots for those interested parties, and then we'll be ready to go then to finish that part of it up.
Just as a point of clarification,
Mr. Vice President?
thank you. Does this limited engagement as you see it entail a phone call, a Skype conversation? Nothing that necessarily needs a physical venue, so to
Exactly.
speak. Thank you.
All of the above. All of the above. And even to the point where you can do a mini survey and include that as a mechanism for them communicating. You don't want to do the full-blown one that you did before, but generating 4, 5, or 6 questions that they may want to respond to that they can do using SurveyMonkey or, something simplistic, but that will allow them to feel like they're engaged in this part of the process.
It's a new process.
And one of the things we're going to start with is circulating the fill-in for the rest of the board members who we haven't had an opportunity to speak with today. So if your name is listed and there is a blank by your name,
I see a lot.
you need to give us a time, and we'll work out around our schedules. And I've given you options of the day, date, and time. I would like to complete them this week. And then, again, a time. Your contact and preference information. So, whatever, whether you want your cell phone, your home phone, that kind of thing, and the phone number. And if you are really technologically savvy and want to do Skype, FaceTime, any of those, that's also available so that you can get that one-to-one, face-to-face conversation. Okay? So we'll just sort of circulate that. Although Mr. Brown his name is already done. He did well. And Ms. Hudson has completed her part as well. So that's another piece that needs to be
See, like, I'm just
done.
gonna put everybody on blast.
All right, anything else from BWP
And I'm decided
tonight?
based on this little bit of experience that I'm not gonna push doodle on you guys anymore, because none of you respond.
Thank you. Yes.
No, we'll whip them into shape.
Oh,
Technology.
please do.
Yeah.
All right, so that concludes the discussion from BWP tonight. So let's move over to Dr. Reimer, who has his hand up.
Just a quick question. As we work with you to set this up, these contacts and stuff, I'm assuming we can also work within the district, Mr. Varner, the communications person here at the
She's saying yes
district.
already.
And he can get us in touch with the technology people to set up the technology for it too?
Yes,
Yeah,
Okay.
so,
that shouldn't be,
I mean, it shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, they're just
I don't think.
structuring it so that it can happen.
yeah,
Yeah,
For Skyping.
Oh.
that shouldn't be, I
Yeah.
think, no.
okay. Okay.
ABT was in partnership.
okay.
Intercommunication.
So,
Yes. That's
counselors
okay.
from Taft, was there anything else that you wanted to share?
You're gonna do the contract.
Okay, and I think,
The LOU and the confidentiality
I think the
agreement.
LOU we are in agreement on, is that right? Okay, so I think we've got consensus on the LOU from BWP. So I'll execute that tonight with you and we'll both have copies. And the other thing then was the confidentiality agreement. Okay, all right, do you want to lead us through that discussion?
Yes, each of you should have received a copy of the proposed confidentiality agreement that was presented by BWP for all the board members to sign. There is a slight modification to the language that I can circulate to everyone.
Oh, this is multiple copies.
Yeah, I was supposed
Oh,
to
yeah.
take one and pass it on. You're in school.
He can do doodle, but he's not gonna pass it.
You have to share. You have to share.
All right, Counselor, you wanna just briefly talk about the change?
Right, exactly, I can. So the change is that where it's listed as to who can disclose or discuss the confidential information that is being kept by BWP, we're adding in addition to the board president and/or independent legal counsel.
Okay, and I know that's based on some feedback that you received today.
Yes.
Any questions on Mr. Brown?
Yeah, based on, I mean, the feedback that I know Mary Jo provided, and we had some conversation, and that I provided, I think that in all three places that board president appears needs to be changed and needs to be either ESC or board counsel, but not board president in any of those three places.
And Counselor, could you respond to that? And if you are confident with your recommendation here, can you just explain why?
And, you know, maybe I need to provide some rationale, but with respect to, I mean, we had already had some level of distrust, and we already addressed this back when we terminated the last search, and we presented the resolution that was passed was structured that that kind of communication always be through ESC, always be through an independent person, just so there's no misunderstandings, miscommunications, or anything else. An example of that, in addition to this agreement, you know, was earlier today, and surprised. I went back and looked at the email message about this social gathering or the meeting of the consultants, and it didn't mention anything about any board members attending. The consultants were going to work with each other and get to know each other, and then discovered that you had decided, I guess on your own, to, you know, attend and participate. Mary Jo and I,
Organized the meeting.
whatever.
Carry on.
Even if it's an organizing role, that was contrary to what we all had discussed and agreed, and included in the resolution, that there aren't going to be any communications other than through ESC and or with council. So that concerned me. That's why I inquired of you, surprised at first. Of coincidentally, I happen to have been with our search people doing my meeting with them, and as I was leaving, saw George, saw Bill coming in, but at no point did I think that I was welcome to stay at Taft. And I thought that was something that was not for board members and none of us. And I think that that continues to be something that we need to build in and maintain as part of the structure of this search on an ongoing basis.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I'm comfortable with what you've presented here, and can you explain to us, Counselor, why you think this is the correct course of action on the agreement?
Yes, President Baker. So our understanding as it relates to the role specifically of ESC is, as we've heard today, as more of a entity that's going to schedule and communications as it relates to organizing meetings and things of that nature. The language here would suggest that ESC has the ability to make a decision as it relates to the release of confidential information that may have some legal connotation as to what can and cannot be done. So the board president, by his power, as well as through independent legal counsel, would be in place there with the hope to address your concerns, Board Member Brown, as relates to that it's just not the board president making the decision or having a discussion as it relates to this, but involving the member of the team who can provide that information to you.
Well, perhaps,
Ms. Gibbs?
Oh, girl.
I was simply going to say perhaps that be changed to the board rather than board president, because none of this happens without the board. I was suggesting BSC or council as a substitute, knowing that neither of you would act unless you knew you had the consent of the board, and that would be perhaps I was suggesting that as a more expeditious way, but it's the board's decision and not that of any single member.
The board president doesn't.
Ms. Gibbs?
Well, thank you, and that is not my recollection, so I don't agree with that assertion of what we did when we onboarded the ESC and this entire team. And there is no supplanting the leadership and the position of board president. So no matter how many times we try, we onboarded 50 more people, we still have a board president to run point and to operate and execute things in efficiency so we can get things done on behalf of this board. And so we say things and somehow they become fact when no one speaks up. So I don't want that to sit in silence as if that is a majority opinion of this board. What we attempted to do with the amazing work of the ESC and our mediator and our legal team was to provide the additional support for our search firm to be able to have every resource that we needed to be successful. And because we are without our board liaison being on staff and us not wanting to compromise them due to some different in the work and keeping this separate, we have all of these entities. But I hope we don't continue down the path and just be excited that we're going to get the job done. But there are things that are regulated to the position of board president that we don't need to debate or try to resolve in a search for a new superintendent. That is well suited for a board retreat and different conversation, but it by no means benefits us or moves us forward in what we need to do, as difficult as it is to get all of us together. For us to use our time very efficiently and effectively, we need our leadership to do the things that help us get our job done well and in the best manner possible. And so I'm comfortable with the way it's written, or I'm comfortable with adding and or legal counsel to where it is. But I'm not going to, it's ridiculous to try to argue that or make that a point, because trust wasn't just with the president, it was with every member around this board. That doesn't help us move forward and create a new narrative for Columbus City Schools, which I think we need to do today.
Thank you. Mr. Peretti?
So, I don't, like, I understand where you're coming from. In these a few instances, I mean, I'm going to push back in what the revised code does say about the board and its powers slightly, because it's very clear. The board president is a spokesman, but not a decision maker, first of all. That's what the revised code sets out. That's the only area that lays out board powers. That being said, in these instances that we're looking at, especially in
Leadership powers, but yes.
leadership powers, there is no definition of leadership or anything like that in the revised code at all. So that's something that's not true. But the places that Mr. Brown is pointing to on point 3 and point 4, I don't understand what should be so hard about shall be returned to the board. And then on part 4, board members shall not divulge confidential information unless so directed to by the board. That would affirm consensus, wouldn't it?
Sure.
My thing is, our attorneys has
Ms.
given us
Gibbs?
a
Well,
recommendation.
I'm asking her for her opinion, so I got what you got plenty of times. I just want to hear what they would like to say to that.
Counselor, and then Dr. Hill as well.
My caution is this. In the reality of this process and transparency, as the board moves to make decisions, if it says the board, then that means the board has to act. And if the board is going to act, the only way that it can act is in a public meeting or an executive session for which there is an exception. So in essence, in order for the board to make a decision with regard to something, then a meeting would need, some special meeting would need to be convened. The reason we said and or legal counsel was because there are going to be times where discretion is involved, confidentiality is involved, but it's not necessarily a decision. It doesn't fall or rise to the weight of a decision. So the reason we thought that that was a compromise, if you will, was because it would then give the cloak that it needed to for those things that are confidential. And, the public record says that they are the keeper of the information that comes in, and then, we are the attorneys for the board. And so we understood that that would allow, if you would, the win-win happy medium to facilitate things moving forward. My concern is if you say the board, then the board will have to act formally on each time on each of those decisions. And I just don't think, given what we just went through with dates, that was just the thinking, that we were trying to find what would be the happy medium.
Dr. Hill?
Well, I feel like I have opened the can of worms here. Because we initiated the confidentiality agreement. And from our perspective, the intent was that when we begin to share information, it's going to be shared electronically. You will receive the candidates' materials and information via Dropbox. So for those of you who didn't do the doodle and you all aren't practicing technology, you're going to need to come up to snuff and come up to speed, because we will not hand you paper copies of the information. They will be secured through a Dropbox. You will be given a password. You will be able to, and they are not copyable and they're not downloadable. Because one of the circumstances that we read through when we went through that process was people were copying the information and then deciding to share it. And so in order to avoid that, given that we've moved to this technological level, we created this confidentiality agreement. And the intent was to bring everybody's attention to the fact that as an individual board member, you should not and cannot share any of this information unless it is agreed upon by the board, but executed by the board president. And so that was how we got to it being the board president in the document that we gave you.
Mr. President, I think I actually have a suggestion. So we are doing a one-on-one with the search firm regarding many of the issues very special to Ohio. I'm going to recommend that we have a dialogue that I think will directly address some of the issues around the genesis of the confidentiality agreement, which may resolve it. So is it at all possible to either table this?
Good idea.
I think it's great.
Because I was curious on what sort of information that once we receive that in Ohio,
The
like
light
once
bulb
we
went off, right?
once we receive it, it's a public record.
Right,
Right, but-
correct.
Electronically or
One at a
otherwise.
time,
Correct.
please.
But again, it's who disseminates that information and how it's done. That's what the confidentiality agreement is, that you cannot independently decide that you're gonna give somebody else's records. If, as a part of the Sunshine Law and a part of your human resources, the public has that access, that's fine. But as an individual, that is not your right to be able to do that unless the board agrees. And that was our intent.
Understood.
Okay, very good. So, Mr. Brown?
That's a great idea, and I agree. What I would hope that everyone will keep in mind is that the concern that I've expressed on, this isn't all that consequential. Certainly the meeting this afternoon was not consequential, but it's something that needs to be built into communications all the way through the process. Thanks.
Okay, if there's nothing else from BWP, is there anything else from Taft tonight? Okay. Anything else from the ESC this evening? Okay. Professor Froelich, you have anything to share with us this evening?
You're welcome to contact me if you'd like to talk about any issues.
Thank you very much. All
I
right.
didn't sign in mine. I'll do Friday. I know Mr. Cole's in the morning, but I think I'll be available.
If there's nothing else for the good of the order, is there a motion that we adjourn? So moved and second. All right, hearing no discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, same sign. Thank you.
It's 8:25 p.m.